Welcome. This is a webinar that we're running to cover basically the upgrade process from CDM V2 to V3, specifically to talk about some of the differences between V2 and V3 to basically give you that foundation of knowledge that will be helpful when you make the journey. We have a few speakers today. So I'm Leon Mallet, so COO at IamCloud, if you may have run into me before. We also have a couple of people who you may or may not have spoken to before, but we have Salman Rashid, who is our head of documentation and training, and Kurt Blunt, who is aware of various hats at IamCloud, but works in the DevOps team, works with the CDM V3 installer specifically, and is a general deployment SME for us. So yeah, the agenda is a quick intro of CDM V3. This is not going to be like a deep dive call into all of the functionality. There's a lot of information already available about CDM V3 on a knowledge base. And so speaking of which, that is the next section that Salman will actually run through as well. We're going to talk about some of the key differences between V2 and V3, as I mentioned, and actually go through a sort of step-by-step guide of, or like a tick box exercise that you really need to work through when it goes to the upgrade process. A few kind of general overview, like lessons and key takeaways that we want to sort of impart on everyone. And there'll be hopefully some time at the end for some questions and answers. I think if you can see, there is actually a questions and answers section on Zoom, like a button. Feel free to be typing questions in anytime throughout this webinar. And actually Kurt or whoever is available might be able to give typed answers throughout, but also for any that we have at the end, we'll just talk through them. So before we kind of jump into the main bulk of the presentation, just want to do a quick update as to where we are. So hopefully everyone is aware of what I'm about to say, and we have sent numerous communications out about this. So Microsoft is going to be deprecating a service that's called RPS, which is basically a legacy authentication system that has been worked basically within the SharePoint Online environment for many years. They soft disabled that some couple of months ago now, and there is like a hard deprecation date on October 15th. Why that's significant to CDM is because CDM version 2.22 or below will stop working on that date. However, we have created a new version of CDM V2, which is actually now up to 2.25, but either 2.24, if that's what the version you've already got hold of, or 2.25, will carry on working past October 15th. And the virtue of that, of course, is that upgrading from 2.22 or whatever to 2.24 or 2.25 is very straightforward. It's pretty much only very small changes in the technology. You only need to do some basic testing just to validate that it works, that authenticates and maps the drives correctly, and then you should be good to go. But hopefully a fairly good stopgap to at least give you a bit more time if you're going to struggle to get upgraded to V3 by October 15th. That said, obviously, V3 is where we want everyone to ultimately go to. So if you do have time to get to V3 in full by October 15th, then of course, you can do that. And this presentation will hopefully help you. So a few bits. So when we say CDM V3, obviously, we're kind of talking about the client, but actually there's a new everything when it comes to CDM V3. So we have a new admin portal called Iris. So this is what you can see on your screen right now. So not only is this just visually a lot more attractive, there's a lot more functional benefit to Iris compared to our old portal as well. So we have things like usage information here, things like expiry dates and other commercial details. But also it's where you do a lot of the actual customization of the features that go beyond just simply the sort of the mapping configurations themselves, which is basically all the old portal did. Yeah, and there's some quite useful links and things like that as well. We'll go through that in a bit more detail in a sec. And there's also behind the scenes a new API or Bifrost and new cloud services in general. So yeah, it is basically a new everything. And of course, it's a new client too. So yeah. The fundamental, the drives themselves won't appear really any different, but they are still drives, although the technology that creates them is different. But from a user's perspective, obviously, we're trying to keep V2 and V3 as similar as possible, because ultimately we want the same benefits as V2, because that's the reason why a lot of you, bought CDM in the first place. So we don't want to release a new version that sort of like basically makes things worse for you. So yeah, but there are some differences, obviously, and also just from a visual perspective, you'll see that there are some new UI elements as well. So a new system tray icon, there's a new slide out tray, there's a new about screen, things like that. Ironically, we're actually already in the process of upgrading this UI for several reasons. One of which is that we want to go multi-platform at some stage. And the technology we've used to use this is just Windows specific, but we will be going to like a more cross-platform technology for the UI in a not too distant release. And gives us a few other advantages as well, in that we'll have much better control over things like authentication states and stuff. But the main thing about CDM v3, of course, is that it no longer uses WebDAV. So it's entirely our own technology, whereas v2 was, if you like, really just kind of an orchestrator for invoking WebDAV drives. The drives themselves with v2 were nothing really to do with our technology. All our technology did was get them going. Whereas with v3, the drives are our technology, we control everything. But getting away from WebDAV does solve a number of sort of implicit limitations and issues with WebDAV, which include things like, which you may have run into before and may or may not cause an ongoing challenge for you. Things like the 260 character path limit. So WebDAV is very, very specific with that limit. So you can go up to 260 characters, no problem. You go one character over and the whole thing stops working. The file disappears, for example, and that can be particularly concerning, for example, if basically the reason for it going to 261 characters, for example, is that a user has just renamed a file, added a few extra characters in, and suddenly it's pushed it over the limit, and then suddenly WebDAV is like, no, I can't see that file anymore, and it's gone. Not a very nice user experience, obviously. Likewise, WebDAV also can't do any kind of pagination. It can only do single requests for example, things like a browse function. And because SharePoint Online will only send back responses of up to 5,000 items, it means that you can only ever see up to 5,000 items in a folder with WebDAV. However, it's worse than even, again, that you would think, because if you go to, say, 5001, not only does the additional item not show, the whole request is broken and the folder essentially appears empty, which again is very concerning because the data's all there. It's all happily sat in SharePoint Online or OneDrive, but the user suddenly can't see anything in the drive. And again, it's not ideal. They can't fix it within the drive either. They have to go into a web browser to go and say, reorganize the files a little bit, break them down into a folder sizes slightly smaller, and then they'll be able to see them again with WebDAV. v3, again, doesn't have this problem. It supports modern API patterns, which includes things like pagination, which means that, if you had, say, 7,000 items in a folder, no worries. We just have to make a few extra calls. So that's all good. Likewise, WebDAV has a maximum upload limit of 4 gigs. But to be honest, if you've ever uploaded a file of like more than, say, 2 gigs, you'll see that it struggles. Again, with v3, no such issues. We just basically are limited by the upload limits of, say, OneDrive and SharePoint Online itself, which I believe is 200 gigs. So, a lot more than you would very likely ever need. Furthermore, CDM v3 is a lot more resilient. So WebDAV is like an end-to-end protocol. So what that really means is that the drive itself and the connection that it makes to 365, it's all one. So if anything is disrupted anywhere along that path, so for example, if like the internet connection drops or say 365 itself starts rejecting requests, maybe sending errors, then not only is that, say, just not going to, say, serve whatever function or whatever request was made at that time, it might actually quite regularly actually destabilizes the drive itself and possibly shows some quite funky, unpleasant errors, like at a network level. Which might even mean having to restart CDM, get the drives back up and running again. With v3, it doesn't work like that. With v3, our drives and the connection we have to 365 are 2 different things. And so if the connection to 365 drops temporarily, the drive remains stable. And even the folders that the user are in right now will also remain active for the user, which is a similar kind of capability to the OneDrive sync client. So that, for example, a user can create a new file in the folder, edit, names, folders, delete, do all sorts of different things like that. And basically, when the connection restores again, it all bounces back into life and it catches up, like the OneDrive sync client. But of course, with v3, we are sidestepping a load of the issues that the OneDrive Sync client has at the same time. So we're doing this in a way that's working very similar to WebDAV, but just with this very subtle ability to be more resilient. Likewise, WebDAV in itself is a legacy protocol. We know from conversation with Microsoft that they don't really want to support it much longer. They haven't really wanted to support it, even to the time that they have now. But moving away from that is great, because V3 is using completely modern, completely published endpoints. It means there's really nothing Microsoft's going to do that's going to sort of threaten V3 in any way. So it just means that in general, we have a lot more stability and a lot more security for our customers without any possibility of there being disruptions, which is great. But we do just want to say we could, if we had chosen to, have created something that just resembled WebDAV, but using, say, a modern API to go and get the calls, which is how a few other solutions in the market actually do this. We realized, though, that that wasn't really like the best solution. And so that was what we really decided we wanted to do. So what we looked at was obviously looked at all of the benefits that like a real-time system like WebDAV brings, but also look at some of the benefits and some of the advantages of using the OneDrive Sync client. And what we've created instead is like a hybrid system. It's completely unique. Nothing else has done it this way. And it gives CDM amazing capabilities. So really it is a best of both worlds solution. It works with all of the advantages of a real-time system, but with all of the stability and basically resilience and extra capabilities of even working offline in theory, albeit that's more future stuff. So it could work very similarly to a sync client as well, if you wanted it to. Likewise, with CDM v3, as mentioned, all of the technology is ours, which means we have full control over all of the drive operations, which is great because it gives us a lot of scope to add in future features to be able to support different requirements that our customers may have. Pretty much can do anything we like within the scope of the drives. And also, it also has a lot deeper integrations within other parts of Windows as well, including Shell, like Office, other bits and pieces, COM and stuff. So not only have we got like fundamental control of the file system, we've got fundamental control over lots of things happening in Windows, which means, again, lots of scope for us to build lots of really interesting and helpful features. Also, all the technology, sorry, I just skipped one. Also, CDM is supported by the cloud services that go around it as well. So we already talked a bit about Iris, and Iris is far more powerful than the old portal was when it came to configuration. But there are actually a couple of extra cloud services that are coming in. You may have already heard about, but these are really taking CDM to a whole new level. The two extra features that are working in the cloud are our provider monitoring service. So what this does is this takes basically the response outcomes of what CDM is doing locally, and they get reported to our centralized cloud service, which provider monitoring service. What this then does is it can use that information to infer the health in real time of the connection CDM is having to your 365 tenancy. Super useful, because obviously that is everything when it comes to the performance of CDM. What it means is 3 or 4 things. One, it means that if there is an issue, we can actually use that to create alerts. So not right now we have like a support team that are there monitoring our own cloud services, making sure they're uptime. We have full uptime, 24/7 support for that. But being able to extend that beyond that to also making sure that CDM's connection to your tenancy has also got that kind of like really solid support coverage is excellent. And again, is very much a unique offering. Beyond that, it also helps us diagnose the source of some of the throttling, because there are certain patterns that we can detect and we can drill into that information to try to understand like what is actually causing that, if it does happen, which is also really helpful for obviously, well, troubleshooting and then mitigating it as well. Even better than that, it can help us learn how to optimize the configurations of CDM so we can give better guidance to our customers to make sure you have a more, say, 365 friendly configuration that's going to work really well and not potentially trigger any throttling or any kind of deterioration. But also it helps us improve CDM as well by learning where the various thresholds are and how CDM can better make sure it stays under them. But the final thing that it allows us to do, which is absolutely the most powerful part of this, is we have, and this isn't there right away, but this will be actually in the next release, is a feedback system. So that what can happen is each individual client is reporting, as I say, the outcomes of the interactions they're having with 365, success, fail, etc. And that is being read in real time by a cloud service, which is then able to report back status signals to all of the clients so that all of the clients can start to understand the overall health picture of the tenant and adjust their behavior if they need to. It's kind of like a regulating system. So yeah, and what that really allows us to do is make sure that CDM is working harmoniously with 365, which again, totally unique, really powerful, gives our customers a significant amount of, I say, reassurance that CDM is going to stay very nice and basically performant in their environment. Next, CDM's technology is almost operating system agnostic. Like 90% of the technology we've created would run on Linux, Mac OS as well. There are still a couple of areas that are not yet completely agnostic, so they will be areas of focus for us over the, say, next 6 to 12 months. It is our goal within about a year to have a Linux and a Mac client as well. So that's quite cool. And also on the other side, not only do we want to be operating system agnostic, we also want to go beyond 365 itself as well at some point. So again, we've built the integration framework that CDM connects to 365 with in a modular way that, right now 365 is obviously our focus, and it will always be our main priority, if you like, because, we're Microsoft partners and we know that that's what most of our customers, care about most, but providing some alternative options as well, even if they're only for like niche use cases, not necessarily like the whole cloud storage system, but maybe just something for one department or for one use case, maybe even like a custom backup system or whatever. There's lots of scope for us to be able to give you plenty of options there as well. So I've talked enough. I'm going to hand over to Salman now. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Leon. Let me just share my screen. Just bear with me. All right, screen 2, shoulder. Share. All right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now.
Yep.
All right. Cool. Okay. Thank you, Leon. Hi again, everyone. My name is Salman, and I am the head of documentation and training at IAM As CDM v3 has reached a general availability, I think now is a brilliant time for me to introduce our new knowledge base. Available at cdm.imcloud.info, the knowledge base is often, in my humble and not so biased opinion, the best place to start, regardless of whether you want to learn more about the product or need assistance, even before you get in touch with the support team. The way we've structured the content in the knowledge base allows us to ensure that you have the right information when you need it. Firstly, the content is organized into clear sections based on purpose. For instance, if you require a high-level understanding of the application, you can refer to the overview section, or if you're seeking detailed deployment guidance, you'll find all the relevant information in the deployment section, and so on. In terms of the format of the content, you'll find that most of it is conceptual to help you understand the why behind CDM features. However, wherever it makes sense, we have blended the why with step-by-step instructions as well, just so you get the context and practical guidance all in one place. Before I move on to my next slide, I did want to give a shout out to our solution articles. And the reason why I wanted to do that was because this content is purely based on thematic issues reported to customers by our end users, including yourselves. The format of these articles is extremely easy to consume. All such articles aim to resolve a specific problem. So you get a problem statement. Along with that, you get a solution to that problem and helpful hints or links to other articles across the knowledge base to provide more information about the problem. These solution articles are not in our main navigation, so to reach them, all you need to do is to search for solution articles or solution docs, and you'll be presented with a list of all the published solution articles in the knowledge base. Sorry about that. Right. The search feature. The CDM knowledge base includes an enhanced search feature that goes beyond delivering conventional search results. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's take the example of the image on the screen. My search criteria is upgrade CDM legacy to v3. Now, just like any other search function, I'm presented with a list of articles that may include some information about upgrading from legacy to v3. But at the top of the page, there's a featured article that was specifically curated for the purpose of guiding you through the upgrade process. You'll find that this pattern is common across search terms. That's because we regularly keyword and index search phrases just to make sure that you get access to these kind of featured articles from various parts of the knowledge base. Finally, the CDM knowledge base is a continually evolving repository of information. My team and I regularly analyze your interactions with the knowledge base, such as phrases that you've searched for or the topics that you visit frequently, just so that we can refine the content and ensure that it remains accurate, relevant, and aligned with your needs. Also, just before I hand back over to Leon, there's a survey link at the bottom of the homepage of the knowledge base, the bottom left corner specifically. We'd love to hear from you and just understand what you think about the way we've curated our content and how we can improve it in the future so that it serves you better. That's it. That's me done. Thanks, Leon. I'll hand back over to you now.
Thanks, Omar. It's great. Hey, everyone again. So yes, now into the sort of main bulk of the presentation, if you like. So CDM v2 and v3 are different. I've already spoken about that a little bit. As we say, v2 is just really a WebDAV tool. The drives are just, they are just WebDAV. All of the tooling that we've created is really just an orchestrator to get them working and to basically make sure they carry on working and to handle things like authentication. v3 is all us. Even though there are some similarities, there are also quite a few differences. So there are differences in functionality in some cases, although we try to keep those as minimal as possible. There are definitely changes in technology, and consequently, as a difference in technology, there can be differences in compatibility as well. So the number one rule, and I would say the number one takeaway that we want everyone to have from this presentation is to treat CDM v3 basically like it's a new product. Because even though it isn't from the kind of commercial perspective, it's just on the same subscription that you already have, the technology is just completely different. So please do take some time to test it fully, to test it in all of the important use cases that you have before you go and do a major deployment. There are a few key areas of note that are worth mentioning. So firstly, AV, antivirus. So, and Kurt is going to go into a little bit more detail about the specifics of this, but fundamentally, because of the technology CDM v3 is using, and also just because of what it does, not only does AV potentially trigger CDM v3 in various ways more than it would have done v2, but the consequences of it basically working against, say, v3's drives or even v3's sort of app data folder can create quite significant deterioration in the way that it works. So it's especially important to be able to exclude CDM v3's drives from, say, scanning, make sure it's whitelisted, and that's also true of the app data folder of this v3 as well. And Kurt will talk through that, as I say, in more detail. Also, because it is different technology and the drives are different, and that is really quite, as in the technology is different, but even there are subtleties to the way that things happen on the drives, so that different applications work with the drives in different ways. We've tried to cover off the vast majority of major things like save patterns and various things like that in the way that v3's drives work, but fundamentally, you do still need to sort of test that. So if you have some specific, particularly niche third-party application, desktop software basically, that you need to be able to work with v3's drives, then you definitely need to be testing that. We've pretty much got full compatibility with all the software we're aware of so far, but where there is any kind of issue that arises, we do strive to make sure that we will make it compatible. Obviously, the sooner we know about an application that for some reason is not working with CDM v3, the sooner the better we know about it, so we can actually get that into our development backlog and actually go and make it compatible. Right? So as I say, functionality, very similar, and hopefully the users will really not see any serious, major impacts on the way that they work. There are some subtle differences though, which I just wanted to mention, and they're not even all in sort of like the ways that you would expect. One of those is check in, check out with SharePoint. Unfortunately, we actually have a solution for that coming literally in a few days when we release 3.21, but I'll just explain like some of the nuances that we're dealing with here. So we actually created a check in, check out compatibility like feature within V3 like over a year ago. But if you like, we kind of didn't fully appreciate exactly not so much how check in, check out worked, but how Microsoft was expecting other applications to work with it. So what I mean by that is, so when check in, check out was basically set as a mandatory flag on, say, a SharePoint document library, V3 handled it fine. But that's not that common. Most organizations and most document libraries are just set as optional checkout, which is the default option when you create a SharePoint document library, and is also kind of the recommended approach. What that means is that for things like Office documents, they don't get checked out because, well, if you checked an Office document out, you would lose quite an important capability, which would be the co-authoring. And so Microsoft obviously wants the ability for Office documents to be co-edited, so have multiple users working from them at the same time. It's a really nice feature. And that is fundamentally antithetical to checking it out, obviously, which locks it to a single user. So for an optional checkout, Office works with co-authoring. That's great. But what about like a non-Office document? Well, basically, it's the responsibility of the third-party application. And that is very varied because some third-party applications can support check-in, check-out, and some can't, basically. So there are some, for example, Autodesk products and Adobe products that have worked that integration into their products. So when you open certain types of files, like with those products, a little pop-up will see, well, if you're using, say, a WebDAV drive or certain drives like that, it will pop up this thing which asks you whether you want to check the file out or not. What happened with V3 is that there are subtle differences in the signatures that exist on the drives, so that even though V3 itself does support checkout, the application, say Autodesk or something like AutoCAD, working with V3 drives weren't detecting the fact that, say, the AutoCAD file on the drive was actually in SharePoint because the signature had changed, and therefore it didn't check the file out. So it's unrealistic for us, obviously, to be able to find every single vendor in the world and get them to support CDM v3 for obvious reasons. So we kind of basically had to take this on ourselves, which is what we've done with the next version with 3.21. So in version 3.21, we've actually created a checkout automation feature, or check-in, checkout automation feature, which is optional, of course, but if you have it enabled and have it on automatic, what it means is the Office files will carry on opening as they do through co-authoring, but other files will automatically get checked out to the given user, regardless of what file that is. And then when the user closes the file, it gets checked back in again. So it's basically enforcing a file lock. It's actually arguably even nicer than the way that Microsoft did it originally, because it means that the user doesn't have to deal with any pop-ups or anything. It just happens behind the scenes. So yeah, but that's just a subtle sort of example of like some of the differences between V2 and V3, things that we hadn't actually, in fairness, completely anticipated. Another thing is not just with a new portal, but I guess a new mantra to the way that we want our customers to be able to configure CDM. So basically with V2, it actually has a surprisingly large amount of features in V2, and lots of different customizations, but you probably don't know about most of them because they're not really documented anywhere. There's no visual way of seeing them. Rather, they're kind of mentioned in various articles of our old knowledge base. And you might only know about them if, well, you've been very diligent and you've gone through our knowledge base sort of A to Z, or perhaps more likely, you've run into a specific problem or you've had a specific request and you've asked the support team and they've said, oh yeah, you can do that. You need to enable this with this certain registry key. So that was V2. With V3, we want to be able to do everything like that, but through the UI itself. So for example, with dynamic drives, which are the new names of converged drives, it's always been possible to be able to select what kinds of sites go into the, say, dynamic SharePoint drive, or what was called a converged SharePoint drive. Before that was registry, now it's just a few tick boxes. What's extra nice about this is not only is it like less deployment overhead for yourselves, it's also a lot more intuitive. It's quicker to do, but even if, for example, you do it, and then let's say in a year or two's time, you move on from your role and another person takes over, they can log back into the portal and immediately understand the status of the product. Whereas trying to infer all of the different features that are enabled through registry options, it's a lot more difficult. So it's more intuitive, it's more sustainable, it's quicker to do, and there's less deployment. So likewise, folder redirection, that used to be registry as well. Now it's just a nice little UI to be able to select how that works. You could tweak things like parts of the user interface before, like you could disable the exit button, quite common in education that they want to not let students be able to exit the application, but also disable things like toast notifications and do much more. Again, used to be registry, now it's just some toggles and tick boxes and stuff. So that leads me to my final slide before I'll hand over to Kurt to go into more technical detail on all this. We have also changed our use of English, which has some general changes, but also some specific ones as well. So yeah, this isn't so much because we're becoming more American. I know this is a late night call for us and designed to primarily get Americans on to be able to watch this in a friendly time. So I need to be careful not to insult any Americans, but but no, this isn't really about being more American. It's about being more international. We've had quite a few issues over the years because obviously British English is pretty much only used in the UK, whereas American English is used all over the world. So yeah, so we are changing that, and we've changed it on our website, we've changed it on our knowledge base, but most importantly, we've changed it in the product itself. And that has the biggest impact, and one of the, funnily enough, biggest tripping points is in the word license. And so with that said, I'm going to hand over to Kurt.
Thanks, Leon. Just share my screen. Hey everyone. So yeah, I'm Kurt, sort of senior DevOps and deployment SME for Cloud Drive Mapper. Work very closely in the deployment area and also work very closely with Salman on the documentation side of things as well. So we're going to go over some key differences between V2 and V3. One being, like Leon has just touched on, the word license. So CDM legacy license will only work in version 2. So the license keys that you're currently using to drive your mapping groups and stuff, they're only going to work in V2. CDM V3 comes with its very own new license key. Once you log into Iris and you go to the Cloud Drive Mapper, like once you've gone through the lobby into Cloud Drive Mapper's dashboard, you'll see license key on the right-hand side. That is your V3 license key. That is site-wide. So we've changed the way we've changed the word, and we've also changed the sort of whole method around license key. License key in V2 drove your mappings for your users. License key in V3 is a license key. So you can deploy that via the installation. You can deploy that via HKey local machine. That key is not changing for any user in your organization. So it makes it nice and easy now. One license key for the whole org. The registry value names are different, and we had to separate out the registries between V2 and V3. While we've been running cross product, we had to do that. So version 2, that has a registry hive of HKey local machine or HKey current user, software IAM Cloud, and then it will be Cloud Drive Mapper without any spaces. Cloud Drive Mapper V3 is software IAM Cloud, Cloud Drive Mapper with spaces. So just have a note there that when you're looking to move to V3, or if you started to move to V3, if you've got current group policies, any Intune scripts that you're deploying, like your license keys out at the moment, just make a note that the registry hives are different and you will need to use a new hive. I always recommend setting up some nice fresh policies for V3 only, keeping your V2 ones. If you are going to test side by side, just keep everything separate. Mapping groups. So again, the whole, like I say, this kind of falls into a bit like the license key as well. So like V2, the license key, that was what sort of held your mapping groups together as well. So in the old portal and in Iris today, you've got legacy mapping group section. When you create a legacy mapping group, You can give a, staff, call it staff, add a OneDrive in there. When you press save, you get given a license key. And that's what you're used to deploying out in your V2 world. Now, we've changed that now. So a mapping group is something new. A mapping group is obviously what it says on the tin. This is now how you sort of configure your drive configurations across the organization. To begin, you get a default mapping group. If your organization only uses a OneDrive, for example, and that is the only drive letter you use for all users, this is going to be really cool. So mapping groups, the default mapping group, if you entered the OneDrive drive letter H, for example, press save, you can deploy the software out with a license key at the installation level as well. The users are just going to work because what CDM does is when you start up, it recognizes that there's no custom mapping group configured in the registry. So CDM knows to go and use the default mapping group. It makes deployment a lot more lightweight, like Leon's already mentioned. You can also have custom mapping groups, which you kind of breaking out the organization into different departments, such as a school, for example, you might have staff and students at that level. Your staff mapping group might have staff documents, some document libraries. The student might have some public area and some student document libraries. Once you press save on both of those mapping groups, you get given a mapping group ID. The mapping group ID can be deployed via group policy, any regedit scripts, or any Microsoft Intune scripts that you have. Again, take a note of the hives, and also this key in particular is a registry string called mapping group ID. We've got lots of documentation around this in the deployment articles and the mapping group articles on the knowledge base as well. We also do provide some scripts in the download section for your Intune Win devices as well to make deploying license keys easier. Any policies like mapping groups, bandwidth policies, folder redirection policies. We have a script template folder in the download section of iOS. What I do recommend is getting all that configuration on the devices first before you even start installing CDM, start launching CDM. You can do that. All those registry settings can be in place on those machines before you even launch CDM, before you even, download the installer. That is where you should be early adopting V3, getting all the registry in place first. It's going to make the sort of startup of CDM a lot more smooth. You're not going to get issues where Intune alone, if you deploy a PowerShell script on Intune to deploy a mapping group to your students or your staff, for example, Intune can't guarantee that that mapping group is going to be on the user's registry hive at the point CDM loads. So I always recommend getting that all set up before you start deploying V3. As for the client installation of V3, it now comes shipped with an exe file, which is great for standalone computers and laptops, great for VDI when you're creating your golden images, and also really good for server deployments. The reason why I say it's great for the VDI golds is because it's an exe, it comes with a nice setup wizard. One thing that I always recommend when you're doing VDI deployments is to not deploy CDM with a run at startup shortcut, which goes into the shell command startup. The reason why is because that in a VDI in a published app environment, when it runs at the shell command startup, it's a little bit delayed. So we have a few recommended approaches to solving that problem. One of them being launching CDM via the user init key. You can create a bat file or a PowerShell script somewhere on the local disk. And the user init key is one of the first things that launches on the user logon profile. So you can get V3 to launch really early in the logon process. And it's starting up, it's mapping the drives for when the user hits the VDI or the published app, CDM is going to be mapped and stuff. The MSI file is for the automated and silent deployments. There is a note here that I would like to address, that the MSI file doesn't come shipped with .NET Desktop Runtime 8. So again, if you're deploying this over GPOs or Intune, you need to make sure Microsoft .NET Desktop Runtime 8 is on the machines beforehand. The install will fail without that. And the reason why the install will fail is because we have a custom action.dll, which is like a Microsoft Windows installer DLL file like that we can run custom actions during the installation. Makes your life easier. Some of those custom actions that we run gives you that seamless deployment. However, we used to use PowerShell scripts in the installer. A lot of companies these days block PowerShell, block scripts. So we moved over to the custom action approach. However, that then enforced us to go to .NET 8 as a DLL, but we can't package .NET 8 in an MSI file, because the way an MSI file launches, if you're in a command prompt and you launch MSI exec, that goes straight into installing CDM as a product. It bypasses all the prerequisites and stuff. The prerequisites actually on at the end of the installation, not at the start. So the DLL can't run then, so the installation gets blocked. Same goes for Intune as well. If you're deploying out via Intune, make sure .NET Desktop Runtime 8 is on the machines before you set up the Intune package to deploy CDM. We now offer an Intune Win package as well, sorry. So in Iris, V3 comes shipped with an Intune Win package. You'll get to see the current revision in the Iris downloads page. So yeah, keep your eye out for that, like when that changes. It comes with deployment guides and also some release notes. Prerequisites, obviously I've just touched on the mandatory of .NET Desktop Runtime 8. If you install via the EXE, we do put .NET Runtime 8 on for you, because the EXE comes with a prerequisite bootstrapper at the start of the install. So all the prereqs get put on at the start when you use the EXE. I am working on some documentation to basically show you how to deploy via the EXE silently. And we're going to be bringing in another Intune Win file that will have the EXE inside the Win file. So you can deploy via Intune, and then it'll put the prerequisites on for you as well. But that's going to be a little bit of time, maybe in the next release or so. We'll work with Salman on the documentation to provide some documentation on how to deploy Intune with the EXE file, not the MSI file, and it will put the prereqs on for you. So the prereqs have changed in V3. It's now built on C++ and .NET Runtime. There's two parts of CDM. There's the UI part that Leon's already showed you some screenshots on, comes with a nice UI. There is also another part of CDM called CDM Core, and CDM Core is the brains behind the operation. So the user itself, they might click the system tray icon, that's the UI. However, all the mapping, when it's mounting your drives, when it's searching your SharePoint sites, when it's uploading, downloading files, when you're opening folders, that's all done via CDM Core. So that uses C++. Now, we have supported operating systems in this prerequisites article, so there is some compatibility. We do support 2016 and all the way up to 2025, and we do support Windows 10 and Windows 11. Big note there is some older Windows 10 editions, I think maybe 1503 or something. You can't install the latest .NET Runtime 8s and the latest WebView 2 runtimes on there. So we've put a minimum recommended approach to the OS there. So if you're on the latest and greatest, you'll have no issues. In terms of supported hardware, we only currently support 64-bit Windows in 3.22, which is coming out in a few weeks. That 3.22 will support ARM64. So all the new laptops that are coming shipped with ARM will be supported soon. The logs and the troubleshooting section for V3 is slightly different to V2. So V2 by default had no logs. So that made it quite hard when users had issues and they couldn't be reproduced on the fly. CDM didn't have logs enabled by default. So we reduced to ask you to enable a master settings key of number 32. That would enable the verbose login in CDM. V3, however, comes with info, warning, and error logs by default. So if a user is using V3 and they hit an issue and we catch the error, we catch the warning already, that's great, because you could send us over a support package, and a support package is something new that we brought into V3. It was actually my idea, by the way. So In the UI, you can click the settings cog, but if you control click the settings cog, you actually get another hidden menu called diagnostics. And we hid this menu away, so not everyone can run this. So by control clicking the settings cog, you actually get some fancy diagnostic menu. In there, you can create a support package. The support package gives us a range of things within the package, one being logs, another being database metadata and stuff like that. Sending that to the support team can be really useful because we kind of gain a brief picture of what was happening at that time. Like I say, imagine V2 when we didn't capture the logs, we then ask you to turn on logs, and then you might not be able to reproduce it for a few more days, and it just drags on. So there is also a method as well there in the UI, in the diagnostics menu, to change the log level. Changing the log level, support team might ask you to do that from time to time. Developers might need debug or trace logs. So we do have two other flavors of logs. Debug is more so for the like OK issues, but they need debug. Trace logs is for the really verbose login. It's for when we have a really niche bug in the software and we need that extra sort of, it's very detailed logs, and then we'll go through them with the developers. You might have like a really odd thing and we've not seen it before. Trace logs pretty much capture absolutely everything. So there is some key considerations from V2 to V3. I've already touched on a few just. There is some new URLs that you need to whitelist in your firewall and proxy. Again, Leon already said that we have we have our own API now, which controls all your license key, your mappings, your policies. You need to make sure that's whitelisted, as well as to provide a monitoring service that comes with its own URL. Antivirus exclusion policies. I know Leon briefly touched on the way AV sort of interacts with Cloud Drive Mapper. Now, some of the antiviruses that we've been picking up on over the last few weeks, such as Sentinel One, Sophos, CrowdStrike, there's a few more, those can be very sensitive by default. Like, let's say you got some default policies set. They can be very sensitive when you spin up V3 in your environments. V3, for some antiviruses, is not treated as a drive letter. So V3 comes with its own file system proxy under the hood. And the file system proxy also comes with its own UNC path. Now, you can't browse to this UNC path behind the scenes, it's not available, but some of the antiviruses pick up on that because it's a kernel driver, and we also have a user mode driver. Because it's at the kernel level, the antivirus picks up as /ironcloud /Z, for example, is your Z drive. So you might be whitelisting Z:/ thinking, hey, I've whitelisted the drive. That might not actually be enough. So when I spoke to Sentinel One the other week, again, there's hundreds of antiviruses out there and we don't have access to all of them. So if you have any issues, the problems that you might fall into is when an antivirus scans your drive, it's a little bit different to V2 to V3. The way we lazy load the drive now, because like Leon said, we kind of real-time browse the drive. You might only open folder A. We don't care about folder B, C, D, E. If you've not opened them, we don't know anything about them. However, an antivirus at a high level, that's going to go and scan all your folders. It's going to open all your folders. It's going to open all the metadata for each file. That is quite intense on the Microsoft APIs. So we really do sort of recommend taking the time to look at the exclusion policies in the AV. Another thing is you need to consent another 365 application. V2 and V3 are separate enterprise applications in the Entra tenancy. I would do that before you even download the exe MSI. That is one of the things I'd do first. Mapping configurations in Iris, we've already touched on. And finally, uninstalling V2. So Leon came to me a few months ago and said, look, we're going to get customers who want to uninstall V2 easily. So V3, as of 3.21, you have the option now to uninstall V2 mass. If you're doing this with MSI, you can mass uninstall V2. It will uninstall, it will quit, it will unmake your drives, it deletes any local app data for V2. It's a full purge of V2. So when you're ready and you finish the piloting of V3 and you're ready to start rolling it out, there is an MSI command, which is on our MSI deployment article in the knowledge base. You can look at that command and run that command, and it will, like I say, uninstall V2 from start to finish. That's back to you, Liam.
Thanks, Kurt. That's great. One moment. Sure. So just a few. Ooh, hang on. Am I? Need to move out of the way of my text. Yes, we recommend moving to CDM v3 as soon as you safely can. That's kind of our official position, if you like, because if you like, safely means don't rush, because V2 and V3 are different. We've covered that. You do need to spend some time testing V3 and familiarizing yourselves with V3 as well before you kind of should go full big bang or even just do a significant phased rollout of it. Really, really important that you do that. However, that doesn't mean you necessarily should stay on V2 for a lot longer. We've had quite a few conversations recently with Microsoft and with the WebDAV team, and they've made it quite clear to us that Microsoft is on a big purge right now to try and get rid of a lot of its legacy technologies. I think it's really about kind of shrinking its footprint from a sort of security exposure perspective. And so just really getting rid of as many technologies as they can is one way of kind of essentially making Microsoft 365 more secure. We know that there was a conversation this year where it was tabled as a suggestion that they get rid of WebDAV this year, but it was agreed that that wouldn't happen. But the fact it was even discussed is suggestive that this is definitely on Microsoft's mind, and therefore we can't really guarantee for a great deal longer, that there will be support in Microsoft for WebDAV, and therefore we want customers to make sure that you're not caught in a tricky spot where Microsoft suddenly makes an announcement that WebDAV is going in, say, a certain number of months' time, because they will give some notice for sure. They're not just going to switch it off, but if that falls awkwardly with your own your own schedule and your own projects and things, what we would say is that really let's try and plan in moving to V3 in a coordinated way, in a safe way, but really as soon as you kind of practically can. As I say, with 2.24, 2.25 now, you don't have to worry about the October 15th deadline anymore. But if you are still on 2.22 or below, please do, make tracks and get yourselves off of that as soon as you can, really, because October 15th is only 2 weeks away. So in any case, you definitely need to be upgrading from 2.22 if that's what all of your users are using. So that's really the main takeaways, if you like. And now I will have a look to see if we've got any questions. I think we've been replying to a few as we've been going along. Murica, very good. Yeah, we can't help it. We do love America. It's great. I mean, and I've got a lot of customers there. So yeah, we are kind of Americanized here in the UK these days. Watch a lot of American TV. But no, I think I just covered actually this question just with that. If on 2.24, then what would the recommended upgrade time frame be? So that I think I just accidentally answered that already, just in that bit about my the conversations we've had with Microsoft and such. We actually did post a blog post, and we are going to be sending a notification out. We have put a formal deprecation date of V2 as 31st of March, which is 6 months from today. So we would recommend, we didn't want it to be a 6-month deprecation window. We wanted to give a 12-month deprecation window. The reason why it's 6 months is really because we think that it would give us, I think we thought it would give the wrong impression of security based on our uncertainty of what Microsoft is going to do with WebDAV, basically. We think the safest and best option is that customers have moved over to V3 by the end of Q1 next year. So within 6 months, essentially. Yeah, as I say, there's almost no chance that WebDAV is going to be affected by then, but we don't know how much longer Microsoft. I mean, it might be that Microsoft doesn't remove WebDAV until 2027 or something, but the main point is it's the uncertainty, and we know that Microsoft is thinking about it. And I don't actually, to be honest, think it's not just that they haven't told us. We actually are quite good conversations quite regularly with the WebDAV team and Microsoft. I think it's that they don't actually know yet. They haven't actually made that decision, but conversations are actively happening. And, you know, as soon as a decision is made, then as we kind of found out from the whole RPS change, which I'm sure you're all aware of from that was quite a rapid decision that Microsoft made. And that actually changed gears over actually a number of days, because Microsoft actually initially gave us some dates that they subsequently revised like 3 times over the course of a week, and suddenly brought that right all the way down. So, you know, it's best to just not let that be a problem. So yeah, we recommend moving to V3, as I say, as quickly as you safely can. Great. I think we've answered all the questions for the call. So, oh, sorry. Which version of V3 includes the V2 uninstaller? No, it's not 3.20. It will be 3.21. So it's the version that is going out pretty imminently, within basically by the end of this week is our hope. It's still in testing. We are just addressing one bug that we discovered, and when that bug is resolved, then we should be good to go. But yeah, so 3.21 is the version of V3 that can also uninstall V2. So yeah, and it also has things like provider monitoring service and things that I also discussed earlier. So it's quite a big release, 3.21 actually. It's a lot bigger than the actual GA release was, the 3.20. The 3.20 was really more just a sort of like baseline stability release. This has actually got quite a lot of new added functionality, but some really quite useful functionality. So yeah, hopefully we'll all really enjoy that. Anyway, I think we have no more questions, so I'll save everyone time and call it there. So thanks everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was useful. And obviously if you do, there was another question coming through. What we'll do is if there are any more questions, and we haven't answered them all on this, we do get a log of them from Zoom. So we'll export that and basically send you a reply through email or something. So anyway, thanks very much. Catch you all later. Cheers.